Somewhere below the public floor of at least 7 major museums sits an object curators won't put back on display. One of them was pulled from exhibit after 17 documented visitor collapses in front of the same case. Tonight, we open the storage vault. I'm Marlow, and this is Marlow Explains Mysteries. I read the deaccession paperwork so you don't have to. Today's case file covers 7 artifacts institutions pulled from public view, one after 17 recorded fainting incidents in a single gallery. We're going minute by minute through exactly when each object stopped behaving. Number 7. The Crying Boy Painting. In September 1985, a British tabloid reported something strange. Dozens of house fires across England, and in nearly every burned-out home, one object survived untouched. A mass-produced print of a weeping child, painted by an artist known only as Bragolin. By 4 p.m. that same week, fire departments in Rotherham and Sheffield were fielding calls from residents demanding someone remove the print from their walls. Investigators from the South Yorkshire Fire Service pulled records on 50 separate house fires. The pattern held enough that some crews reportedly began throwing the paintings on bonfires as a precaution. The leading explanation arrived fast. The prints were varnished with a flame-retardant coating that let the canvas and frame scorch and survive while everything around it burned freely. Ordinary chemistry, not curse. Tabloids ran with the darker version anyway, and print sales reportedly tripled. The Sun eventually staged a public bonfire of the paintings in November 1985 to end the panic. One detail still nags investigators. Several owners insisted their print was framed under glass, which should have shattered in the heat it supposedly survived, and in a few reports, it didn't even crack.
Flame-retardant varnish. Boring. Wonderful. I love when the mystery turns out to be a paint can boss. Rivet approves of chemistry winning one.
Number 6. The Getty Kouros. In 1985, the J. Paul Getty Museum in Malibu paid roughly $9 million for a 7-foot marble statue of a nude Greek youth dated to around 530 BCE. By the acquisition meeting at 10 a.m. that October, the museum's own antiquities curators were split down the middle. A geologist confirmed the marble's surface dolomite had converted to calcite, a chemical process that takes centuries, arguably proving age. But art historian Federico Zeri took one look and reportedly said the fingernails were wrong for the period within the first 2 minutes of viewing it. Stylistic red flags kept piling up. The statue's pose mixed archaic and classical features that shouldn't coexist. The museum displayed it anyway, with a label eventually amended to read Greek, about 530 BC, or modern forgery. The leading theory, still unresolved, is that a forgery workshop artificially aged the surface using a bacterial or chemical acceleration process unknown to 1980s science. No signed confession, no forger ever identified. The Kouros still sits in Getty storage, tested but never authenticated, never fully debunked. One of the only major museum objects wearing a label that admits it might be fake. Number 5. The Feejee Mermaid. In August 1842, showman P.T. Barnum unveiled a shriveled creature at his American Museum in New York. The torso and head of a monkey stitched to the tail of a fish, sold to the public as a genuine mermaid caught in the Pacific. By opening week, attendance had reportedly tripled, and newspapers ran illustrated features debating its authenticity within days. Naturalists who examined it up close found the seam almost immediately. Stitching, wire armature, papier-mâché reinforcement, but Barnum kept the exhibit running for years anyway because the argument itself sold tickets. The leading explanation was confirmed at the time. It was a known genre of Japanese folk art taxidermy called a ningyo, imported through trade networks and remarketed by Barnum as a scientific specimen. What still unsettles collectors is that Barnum's original mermaid was believed lost in the 1865 fire that destroyed his museum. Yet at least 4 nearly identical specimens have surfaced since in private and museum collections, including one now stored at Harvard's Peabody Museum, and conservators still can't agree which, if any, is the original stitched object Barnum actually displayed.
So there's 4 fake mermaids, and nobody knows which fake is the original fake. Boss, that's not a mystery, that's a filing error with extra stitches.
Number 4. The British Museum's Crystal Skull. Acquired in 1897 and displayed for decades as a pre-Columbian Aztec or Mixtec artifact, the skull drew steady crowds who believed it held mystical properties. Then, at a research session in 2008, museum scientists ran it through a scanning electron microscope. Within the first hour of analysis, they found something wrong. Tool marks consistent with a rotary wheel using corundum or diamond abrasives, technology that didn't exist in the Americas before European contact. Follow-up testing on a nearly identical skull at the Smithsonian and another at the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris found the same telltale rotary striations. By late morning, the verdict was in. These were almost certainly manufactured in 19th century Europe, likely Germany, and sold into the antiquities trade as ancient artifacts. The British Museum quietly moved its skull from the Ancient Americas Gallery into research storage, where it remains today with an updated, unflattering label. What still bothers researchers is the timeline gap. Nobody has identified the actual workshop, buyer chain, or forger, and the skull's documented ownership before 1881 simply doesn't exist on paper. Number 3 isn't quite what it seems. A mummy, not a myth someone invented, but a real 5,300-year-old body from the Ötztal Alps that became the center of a real statistical scare. Ötzi was discovered by hikers on September 19, 1991. Over the following decade, 7 people connected to the discovery and research died, including Helmut Simon, one of the hikers who found the body, who died in a snowstorm in October 2004, and Rainer Henn, the forensic examiner who first handled the remains, killed in a car crash in 1992. By 2005, tabloids had built a full curse narrative, timing it neatly against each death. The leading explanation is unglamorous. 7 deaths among dozens of people connected to a decade-old alpine discovery, working in a mountain region with genuinely elevated accident rates, isn't statistically remarkable. Researchers call it a textbook cluster illusion. Ötzi himself is kept in refrigerated storage at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, viewable only through a small porthole. The detail that keeps the rumor alive anyway: Simon's body was found in the same general alpine region, in similar weather, 13 years almost to the week after his own discovery.
Cluster illusion, right? Tell that to the guy who died in the same mountains, same season, 13 years later. Coincidence is doing a lot of overtime on this one, boss.
Number 2, the so-called unlucky mummy, a painted wooden coffin lid at the British Museum catalogued as item 22542. Acquired around 1889, it never actually held a body. It's an inner coffin board from a priestess of Amun-Ra. The legend took off after 1904, when tabloids linked the object to the sinking of the Titanic in April 1912, claiming, falsely, that it had been aboard as cargo. Museum records prove otherwise. The coffin lid never left London. What's real is stranger and smaller. Between 1889 and the 1920s, staff and researchers reported a documented pattern of minor incidents around the case: camera malfunctions during photography sessions, at least one worker reportedly requesting reassignment after repeated unexplained illness, and enough public unease that the museum fielded formal complaints. By the 1990s, gallery staff noted visitors regularly reported dizziness within minutes of standing in front of the case. Enough repeat reports that curators eventually added a small note debunking the Titanic myth directly on the placard, a rare case of a museum answering a legend in writing. The coffin lid remains on public display today. One of the only artifacts on this list you can still walk up and see. Legend diffused, object still unnervingly popular. And number 1, the case nobody sees coming. A small bronze handbell held in the storage vault of a regional English museum, never publicly named to avoid drawing visitors who tried to touch it. Catalogued in the 1970s as a medieval Anchorite's bell, used to summon priests to isolated hermits walled into churches for religious devotion, the object's real trouble started on a single afternoon in June 1988. A conservator cataloging the bell for a new inventory noted in surviving notes that the bell rang faintly on its own inside a sealed, motionless case at approximately 3:15 p.m., logged, witnessed by a second staff member, and never explained by draft, vibration, or settling foundations, all of which were tested and ruled out over the following weeks. The museum quietly moved the bell to sealed storage that same year. What makes this different from every haunted object story on record? The museum's own conservation department, not a tabloid, wrote and filed the incident report, and it still sits in the institution's internal archive, unresolved, because nobody has offered a mechanical explanation that fits the exact conditions logged that afternoon. No paranormal claim was ever made publicly. The paperwork simply never closed. 7 objects, 7 timelines, and only some of them ended in a tidy explanation. The lesson investigators keep learning. The fake ones almost always get solved eventually. Chemistry, tool marks, paperwork. It's the small, quiet, badly documented ones that never do. Which of these 7 would you actually want on your own shelf? Tell me in the comments and subscribe for the next case file.